Everyone remembers the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, a legendary last stand against a colossal Persian army. But that was a defeat. What happened next? This is the story of how 10,000 Spartans got their revenge and saved Western civilization. This is the Battle of Plataea. In 479 BCE, the Persian invasion was supposed to be over. Athens lay in ashes, and a massive Persian army still controlled the heart of Greece. Its commander, Mardonius, had everything in his favor: superior numbers, elite infantry, and the finest cavalry in the ancient world, deployed on open ground he had chosen for victory. Opposing him was a fragile Greek alliance led by Sparta. They had no cavalry, fewer numbers, and no room for mistakes. For nearly 2 weeks, the two armies faced each other near Plataea, locked in a silent standoff. What followed wasn't decided by strength alone, but by patience, terrain, and one fatal miscalculation. When the Persians finally attacked, they charged straight into the one formation designed to destroy them: the Spartan phalanx. A year earlier, King Xerxes had led his colossal invasion. The stand of the 300 became legend, but it was a defeat. Athens was burned. The war machine seemed unstoppable. Then came the miracle at Salamis, where the Greek navy smashed the larger Persian fleet. This naval victory was a turning point, but it wasn't the end. Xerxes retreated, but he left behind his trusted general, Mardonius, with the best of the best, an enormous professional army of around 100,000 men. This wasn't a skeleton crew. It was a hand-picked army with a single mission: finish the job. Mardonius was so confident he even reoccupied and finished destroying Athens just to prove a point. The crown jewel of his army was its cavalry. Mardonius was smart, and he chose his ground carefully, drawing the Greeks to the wide-open plains near Plataea, perfect cavalry country. On paper, the situation looked grim. For the Greeks staring down at the sprawling Persian camp, it must have felt like they were facing an unwinnable war. Leading the Greek alliance was the Spartan regent Pausanias, nephew of the hero Leonidas. Pausanias wasn't just a brute warrior. He was a cunning and patient strategist. He understood his army's core, the hoplite phalanx. The phalanx was a tight block of heavy infantry, 8 ranks deep. Each soldier wore bronze armor and carried a massive 7 to 9 foot spear and a 3-foot wide shield. Locked together, they formed a solid wall of shields with a deadly hedge of spear points. A phalanx on the move was a terrifying grinding wall of death. But here's the catch: this frontal strength came at the cost of flexibility. The phalanx was slow and horrifically vulnerable on its flanks and rear. A cavalry charge into the rear would cause instant chaos. This was the exact problem Pausanias faced. He knew that if he let Mardonius fight on the open plain, his phalanx would be encircled and destroyed. His entire strategy depended on finding a way to negate Persia's greatest advantage. The battle didn't kick off with a heroic charge. Instead, it began with a tense standoff that dragged on for 11 long days. Pausanias made the first masterful move. He refused to be lured down onto the open plain. Instead, he positioned his 80,000-strong Greek army on the high, broken slopes of Mount Cithaeron. This terrain was terrible for cavalry. Mardonius was too smart to order an uphill charge against a fortified phalanx. So the two armies just watched each other, the tension broken only by skirmishes. Mardonius sent his cavalry on daring hit-and-run raids. In one famous clash, the cavalry general Mecistius was killed, a huge morale boost for the Greeks. But even with this success, Pausanias wouldn't take the bait. He held his ground. Mardonius figured that time was on his side. He thought he could just wait, and eventually, the fragile Greek alliance or their supply lines would break. The popular image of a Greek army is just a solid block of hoplites, but that picture is incomplete. A huge part of the Greek force consisted of lighter-armed troops, the Siloi. These were skirmishers with javelins, slings, and bows. The Athenians, in particular, brought a crucial contingent of archers. These light troops were Pausanias' answer to the Persian missile threat. The Persian army was built around the archer. Their doctrine was to shred an enemy formation with arrows before the infantry even made contact. Pausanias knew his hoplites couldn't take arrow fire forever. The light infantry acted as a vital screen. They could move out in front of the phalanx, harass the Persian archers and cavalry, and keep them from getting into perfect range. While the hoplites stood firm on the hills, it was these light troops engaged in constant skirmishes along the Asopus River, proving their worth again and again. After more than a week, Mardonius grew impatient. He needed to force the Greeks' hand. He shifted his strategy to attrition, again turning to his cavalry. This time he didn't waste them on frontal attacks. Instead, he sent them on a sweeping raid around the Greek army and into the mountain passes. The raid was a devastating success. A huge supply convoy was intercepted and destroyed. Suddenly, the secure Greek position on the hills became a trap. But Mardonius wasn't done. 2 days later, he launched an even more daring raid. This time, the target was water. In a brilliant maneuver, Persian cavalry got behind the Greek army and cut off access to their only source of fresh water, the Garphian spring. This was checkmate. The high ground that had protected the Greeks now isolated them. The position that gave them a tactical advantage now threatened to starve and dehydrate them into submission. Pausanias couldn't stay, but he also couldn't attack. Facing a supply catastrophe, Pausanias had no choice but to order a withdrawal. The plan was to fall back under the cover of darkness to a new, better protected position with fresh water. But executing a complex night maneuver with tens of thousands of soldiers from a dozen bickering city-states is easier said than done. And on this night, everything that could go wrong did. It started with a stubborn Spartan officer who flatly refused to move, seeing any withdrawal as a stain on Spartan honor. Pausanias spent hours arguing with him, throwing the entire schedule into chaos. Meanwhile, the Greek center got confused in the dark and fell back way too far, completely out of the fight. As dawn broke, the situation was terrifying. The Greek army was scattered. You had the Spartans on the right, the Athenians on the far left, and a massive gaping hole where the center was supposed to be. It looked less like a planned retreat and exactly like what Mardonius had been waiting for. A panicked, disorganized rout. From his camp, Mardonius watched the sun rise on a scene of pure chaos. He saw the Greek center had vanished. He saw the Spartan and Athenian flanks separated and exposed. After 11 days of patient strategy, he believed his moment had arrived. He made a critical and ultimately fatal assumption. He thought it was a full-blown cowardly retreat. The battle was already won. All that was left was the chase. Throwing aside all caution, Mardonius gave the order for a general assault. He wouldn't wait for his archers or cavalry. In his eagerness to deliver the final crushing blow, he personally led the charge at the head of his best troops. It was a moment of supreme confidence. But in his haste, Mardonius had made a terrible mistake. The Spartans weren't fleeing, and he was leading his lightly armed infantry into an uphill, close-quarters fight against the best heavy infantryman in the world. Thousands of elite Persian infantry splashed across the river and charged up the slopes, loosing a massive volley of arrows. But the Spartans weren't rooting. On Pausanias' command, they halted, turned, and formed their phalanx. Shields locked, spears leveled. They became an immovable wall. When the omens were good, Pausanias gave the order, and the entire Spartan phalanx charged down to meet the Persians. The clash was brutal. The hoplites' long spears outreached the shorter Persian weapons. Their heavy shields and bronze armor deflected blows. The sheer weight and disciplined pushing of the phalanx began to drive the Persians back. The Persians fought with incredible courage, desperately grabbing at Spartan spears, but it wasn't enough. The critical moment came when Mardonius himself was struck down and killed. The death of their leader was the final straw. The Persian line shattered, and the fight became a rout. The Persian rout turned into a slaughter. Thousands fled back to their fortified camp, but it was no sanctuary. The victorious Greeks stormed the walls and cut down the now leaderless soldiers by the thousands. The Battle of Plataea was a stunning and decisive victory. It was the final, definitive end to Xerxes' invasion. Never again would a Persian king mount a full-scale conquest of the Greek mainland. Plataea stands as a masterclass in strategy. Pausanias refused to play his opponent's game. He used terrain, weathered a logistical crisis, and most brilliantly, he capitalized on his enemy's single fatal mistake. The chaotic retreat, a moment of near disaster, was turned into the perfect bait, luring Mardonius into exactly the kind of battle the phalanx was designed to win. The victory secured the independence of Greece, allowing its unique culture to flourish and ultimately lay the foundations for Western civilization. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into ancient warfare, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more stories like this.